Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. We're your hosts, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, welcome to episode 9.
Jeez.
I know, almost at the Big 10.
Yeah.
The Big 1-0. We thought that today we would just talk about some of our favorite aspects of Formula One. Again, some of our episodes are going to have historical ties or a lot of knowledge behind them. Some of them are just going to be kind of free-flowing, what brought us into the sport, because we are, like we said, we started this podcast as newish fans to the sport. We want other people to get into it, and so hopefully by detailing what we like about it, we can show people that have never watched a race before what they can expect or what they can look forward to.
Yeah, I agree with that. To kind of tie into that, we want to go on this journey with you guys so that y'all can also learn the things that we're learning as we're learning them to become better fans and appreciate the sport at a higher level.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're watching this and you have your own thing about Formula One that you love or that you agree with us or disagree with us, let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave us a comment. If you're watching on or listening on our podcast streams, drop us a line on Facebook or Instagram or hit us up on Twitter and just tell us what your thoughts are about this episode. With that, let's go ahead and get into it. You mind if I kick us off?
Let's go for it.
I mentioned this in our favorite tracks episode, but one of my favorite things about everything really in life, it can be sports, it can be where you got to eat, it can be where you live, I don't know, whatever. I love atmosphere, ambiance, making the right scene for the occasion. And I think Formula One, better than any sport, even better than like the Super Bowl or the World Cup. Maybe it's like every weekend is the World Cup. They know how to set the stage for a race weekend.
Well, yeah, because if you think about it, you get one. Well, for most countries, you get one a year.
Yeah.
So that is essentially your Super Bowl, which makes every single race special. Now, obviously, there's 2 in Italy. There's now 3 in America. But it's like when you're going to these countries, this is the only time that this so-called circus is going to go to these countries. So they're going to make it as big as they possibly can. I mean, there's several different racetracks that'll have concert stages on the outskirts so that there's giant festivals essentially where people are performing, you can get food, you're hanging out way after the race. You're just still at the track partying.
And it's not a one-day event either. Maybe not most, but a lot of folks go for the full 4 or 5 day race weekend.
Oh yeah, from what you guys see on TV, it starts Friday, then moves into Saturday and Sunday, but it doesn't start on Friday.
No.
These drivers and everything starts to get set up essentially Wednesday, but realistically more Thursday, and Thursday is when the party actually kicks off.
They're having the kickoff concerts and the food vendors.
Everybody's tailgating.
So whenever I go back to when I first got into F1, prior to me coming into the sport, you'd always hear about how COTA in Austin, the Circuit of Americas, was a big deal and how they'd have 400,000 people across a race weekend. And that blew my mind. I was like, who cares about Formula One? Why are so many people going to this? But it's because it was the only, at the time, the only race in America, and every American fan was going down to Austin
pretty much
for the weekend. And that's why you had so many fans on there. And then once I got into the sport and I started watching it, I was like, I get it now.
Yeah. And then it gets bigger when you realize that, all of the previous United States Grand Prix failed.
Yep.
Vegas failed. Dallas failed.
Yep.
I think there was even one in Chicago. Failed.
Yeah, the Dallas one. That's an interesting little history thing. If y'all want to go Wikipedia search the 1980 whatever Dallas Grand Prix.
Yeah, watch somebody pass out from heat exhaustion trying to push their car across the line.
Don't host things in Dallas in July. But I'll give a couple of examples. Maybe you can piggyback on some of these. Probably the best recent example. So if you're just getting into Formula One and you're looking at, what's this ambiance that he's talking about? What is this stage that you're setting? Okay, you've watched the qualifying. You're still not getting it. Watch the Netherlands race.
No, that's a good one.
Watch Austria.
Those fans get into it.
Yeah, Netherlands and Austria, those are two of Max Verstappen's home tracks. And I say recent because obviously he's very dominant right now. And when you have a dominant driver, your home country comes out in full force for you. And so when they go to the Red Bull Ring in Austria, there is a lot of orange smoke everywhere. And the Dutch fans are not shy about it. And then obviously you go to the Netherlands, Circuit Zandvoort, and they're doing the same thing. So much so that last year they yellow flag qualifying because they kept throwing the smoke grenades on the
track, man. And then I'll say this: the cool thing about Formula One fans, I watched a video of this fan throwing one of those things onto the track, and he just gets bombarded by everybody sitting around him, basically being like, "What are you doing, man? You're ruining a perfectly good race day. We're not here for antics. We're here to watch the show."
No, I'm here for that. I'm here for them blaring Super Max in the crowd and going crazy. And it's not just Max; it's every driver. When you go to the Silverstone race, you have the fans going crazy for Lewis and now George. And Lando, they just go wild. They've got the British flags going. It's a whole scene. My last point on ambiance or atmosphere is nothing to do with fans or the weekend setup or anything like that. It's just the location of these tracks. There's two different kinds of circuits in Formula One. You have street circuits and just racing circuits. The street circuits are special because you are ripping through city streets that normal people drive on every day. You look at Monaco, that's just the main streets in Monaco. You look at Singapore, that's just it's a nice park area around Marina Bay in Singapore. And so you have those. You look at Baku in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
It goes down Main Street. I don't know what it's called in Baku, but it's Main Street. It winds up through the city, goes around a very historic, like multiple 100-year-old castle, and then goes back down the main straight. And then you look at the races that are out in the woods. Austria is a good example. Spa in Belgium is an awesome example where you're just a car going 200 miles an hour through the woods in Belgium, and that looks awesome.
Yeah. And then kind of the last point that I'm going to add to your atmosphere point is you have that atmosphere. You have the race fans, you have the beautiful scenery, but there's also another atmosphere, the luxury atmosphere. So to piggyback onto your Monaco talk, Monaco, if you ever go to the race, is insane. Anybody who's everybody who's anybody is at this race. Every celebrity from every nationality, every country is at this race. There's so much money, so much popularity. It's a huge atmosphere. Yep. I mean, if you're talking about that, like you said, atmosphere, the Monaco Grand Prix for me is the one that stands out the most, just because of its historic value and all of its luxury that it brings.
And they'll show you on race day. They'll go to the Mercedes team garage where Tom Cruise spent some time. They'll go to the Red Bull garage where Gordon Ramsay was there.
Yeah, I saw. I'm pretty sure I saw Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
They're all there
at the Monaco Grand Prix.
It's a big deal. So yeah, atmosphere, the tracks, the fans, the people, the environment. It all compounds into this awesome 3-day event that just. Again, it's like the Super Bowl or World Cup every weekend.
Yeah. I'm going to use Monaco to venture into our next area.
Okay.
Which is storylines. So the Monaco Grand Prix, its historic value is so insane. It's the oldest standing still Grand Prix. Almost every single driver has driven on it. And when you think about that, when you think about the stories, the historic battles that have happened at this Grand Prix, those storylines are what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Because originally, when you get into a new sport, you're originally drawn to the actual sport itself. But then what keeps you there is you learn about the people in the sport. You learn about the people, like what they're doing, what they've been through in the past, what they're doing currently. And so you can use examples like Mercedes, who sheer dominance, and now they're not. So their story is going from the top back down, and now it's how they get back to the top.
How does the climb start again?
Ferrari, sheer dominance. Michael Schumacher, and then all of the legends before him. All of them.
Yeah.
That's a storyline in itself, just the team Ferrari. But then you look at the different storylines like we've already talked about. You have 2021 Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Then you have 2022 Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. I mean, now it's Checo Perez and Max Verstappen.
But also kind of Fernando Alonso.
Yeah. Well, Fernando Alonso is another great storyline. You're talking about a driver who was at the top, reached the very, very top, won back-to-back world championships, and has been dogging it out, trying to get back there ever since.
Just puttering around in the midfield.
Takes time out of the sport, gone from F1, comes back, and now he's fighting towards the top. Like these nuances about every driver, about every team, about every track, they're interesting. And when you get to learn them, it almost makes you root even harder for the people that you like.
Yeah, Drive to Survive gives you a lot of that, but it's not the end-all be-all. Drive to Survive is a great place to start to get the foundation of storylines. But then just as you watch the race weekends or you follow F1 Twitter or you do whatever, the story continues to build in your head. And then you go read some Wikipedia pages. You watch YouTube videos on historical events. Like we mentioned the Dallas Grand Prix earlier. Like that's just a storyline in itself. We're like, why don't they host a Grand Prix in Dallas? That's why it was a disaster. So they don't do it again. Why do they continuously host an event in Monaco? Even the drivers hate the track because they have made that a spectacle that supersedes everything else. And you have to race in Monaco, even though the cars are 10 times bigger than they were when they first raced in Monaco.
Oh, yeah. And then the final part of that is the drivers themselves. I mean, a lot of these drivers have been competing with each other since they were kids.
Yeah.
And if they haven't, then the story is interesting in like, okay, take Lewis Hamilton, for example. Started in RC car racing when he was super young, then got a go-kart and took off with it. And he was so good in go-karting, moved into the junior leagues, finally gets into F1. That is its own storyline in itself. And every single driver on that grid has one.
Yeah. And they, again, like you mentioned, the really young battle. So you'll start to see, you'll hear names in the paddock on the weekend, like who's a reserve driver, who's a test driver. They're probably like teenagers or like very early 20s.
Oh, yeah.
And they probably just got done with karting like 4 years ago, and they have made their way from F4, 3, 2 in a matter of like 4 years, and now they're at the big show. And you can go back and research these guys because it's so recent. They have the YouTube videos where you can follow their entire career. And in a span of about 8 years, they go from being a kid driving a go-kart to being a multimillionaire driving a 200-something mile an hour F1 car around Monaco.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
That's crazy.
Let's piggyback off that a little bit. Let's say we talk about these reserve drivers and coming up in the sport and all that. One of the things that makes F1 great is it is, I'll use a word that you used before we started this, it's an exclusive club.
Yeah.
There are only 20 drivers and only 10 teams. That's it. Now, there's a couple years where they've had an extra team. They've gone up in the grid. They've gone down in the grid. But on average, 20 drivers, 10 teams. There is a long approval process for becoming a new constructor and adding spots to the grid. So whenever you look at the grid every race weekend, it's the same. It's the same 20 guys fighting to get podiums and fighting to get wins. And it builds out those long-lasting storylines that carry over not race to race, but year after year after year. That's how you get your fan favorites. That's how you get villains, like Fernando Alonso's labeled as a villain. You have the good guys, like Sebastian Vettel's a good guy. Lewis Hamilton's a good guy. Max is probably a villain. I don't know.
It's debatable. I would say villain in the younger years, hero to some people.
Yeah, now he's a hero. But it's that exclusive club that if you're not part of it, you're not part of it. It's not like the NFL where, yeah, you've got 32 teams, but then you have thousands of players. Not saying anybody can be an NFL player, but it is way more likely you can be in the NFL than you're driving F1.
Yeah, considering there's 32 teams and each team has to fill a 50-man roster.
53-man roster.
53-man
And then
roster.
practice squad.
Yeah, that's 32 teams that all have to meet those specs. Meanwhile, one team in here, you have 2 drivers and probably a reserve driver.
Yep.
That's it.
And that's it.
That's what's crazy about that is when you look at, like, very recently, like this year, I've started following the F2 series. So I'm trying to see what these new guys look like, how they're going to do. I'm trying to learn more because we had talks in the past about why these drivers stay in the lower leagues for longer.
Yeah.
It's because of that exclusivity that you talked about. It's the fact that there is not another seat, period. And if you are going to get into F1, there are multiple ways, but essentially the right way is you're so good that they take somebody else who's in F1 who's not as good and take them out so that you can fill their seat. And that is so hard to do. Like imagine if an MLB team, like baseball, like imagine if one of those teams, if there was only 5 players.
Yeah.
And they
just
have,
your starting rotation.
They have each team has 3 different farm leagues, and oh my gosh, man, it's ridiculous.
A quick callback to what you said. You said that you're following F2 now. You know what I've noticed this year in the first 2 races of the year, who they're showing in the paddock?
What's that?
Drugovich.
Yeah, he's sitting there standing in the paddock with the team.
One of the guys that we called out in one of our earlier episodes is, hey, where's this guy going to be, or why isn't he in F1 yet? Well, he's not an F1 driver yet, but he's very, very close.
In the door.
He's like where Piastri was last year as the Alpine reserve driver.
Let's see what team he goes to at the last second.
Man. But it's definitely that exclusive club that makes it just interesting because it's not a hodgepodge of people and characters. It is a very small, tight-knit group that, again, a lot of drivers like and love other drivers, and then they hate other ones, and that's where you get your stories on race weekend.
Oh, 100%.
Especially the Max Lewis years.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the exclusivity is definitely something that's very interesting, but I'm going to use that to segue into our next one.
We're just going
Why
to
not?
back.
Just keep going through them. When you're talking about these 20 drivers, it's very easy, and it seems like it happens very fast, but you get to know these guys' personalities very well.
Oh, yeah.
And that's also part of the whole thing that ties you into the whole experience, is you learn about Carlos Sainz's sense of humor. You learn about Fernando Alonso's sense of humor, but also his ferocity. You learn about Max's focus. You learn about, all of these guys have different traits and different sides of them that I don't think you get to see really in other sports. So it's like you know these guys, but you don't. But they're all over YouTube, and then the teams themselves market everything about them.
Yes.
And the fact that you see them interviews, you see them all weekend, almost every single weekend. You get to know these guys very well.
Probably the most marketed guy is Lando Norris.
Right.
He's doing a lot of self-marketing too, but it's genius. The Twitch streams, the ads, all the merch deals that he's got going on. It's incredible.
Yeah, and then you see these guys who are high caliber drivers driving the most expensive cars in the world. And what do they do for fun? Well, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, and Lando Norris will hop in an F1 lobby and play F1 22 or F1 whatever it is at that time together, just like we do. And it's like, oh, these guys are just average dudes who happen to drive $100 million cars.
I love seeing, I've got two examples for you. One, I saw, I think Max Verstappen post on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, him taking his Kelly Piquet and her daughter go-karting.
Nice.
That's cool.
That's
and then somebody put in the comments, wouldn't you hate to show up with your friends go-karting and you're racing against Max Verstappen?
Imagine you're in the line. It's like, can I get the next race? I don't want to be in that one.
And then the other one, this is a call out from Drive to Survive. You remember when they were, I don't even think it was the Monaco race weekend. I think it was like an off week, but Charles and Carlos were just driving around in a Ferrari through the streets of Monaco, and Charles was like calling out, that's where I went to school. That's where I grew up. And it makes you realize, like, they're still pretty young. They're mostly all in their 20s.
They're figuring it out.
They're millionaires, but they're also kind of regular people because this is just what they do. They're race car drivers, but they're also regular people.
Yeah, regular people known in every single country with millions of dollars.
But that's to your point, the whole Twitch stream thing. Like, you watch, Lando or back when they were doing sim racing. Remember that was a big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get to see their personalities very clearly over those interactions.
There's no running away when it's just you and a headset with a mic.
No.
There's not very far you can go.
And then you have the examples like you brought up a couple weeks ago. In real time, business settings, being interviewed professionally, Fernando Alonso, I don't know, we'll see. As he's watching Max go around.
Or Orlando Norris behind. Like, okay, so when we go karting, I'll go on that track, and whenever I get maybe 3 laps, 4 laps in, I start to, sometimes I'll start to sing, like a song will pop in my head or something like that while I'm just driving around the track. And then I'm watching a practice session, and I see Lando Norris driving around. It's Friday then, it's Saturday, Sunday, what?
What's the best example of someone's personality? Hint, hint, Carlos Sainz.
Oh, you mean smooth operator?
That one and tell me I'm P1.
That's by far that one.
He's a normal guy that just he's the only one on the track, and he just wants to know that he's in first.
Hey guys, this is Jeremiah, co-host of Turn 1 Podcast. We're going to get right back to this week's episode, but first I wanted to let you know where you can go to find us. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Turn 1 Podcast. If you want to check out our audio-only version, you can check us out on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts at Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. For any questions, concerns, you can reach us at trn1podcast@gmail.com. All right, let's get back to it.
Okay, I'm going to go to this one. This is true in most sports, and it's a little bit vague, but I'll try to explain it. But some sports, you can buy your way out of a lot of things, which I'll talk about in F1, but the winners are rewarded in Formula One. I'll start with qualifying. To get first place in the race or to start in first, you have to be the fastest in qualifying.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes into that other than just the driver going in and running a nice hot lap that is faster than everybody else. Your entire team has to be on their A game. Your engineers have to have the car set up down to a T. The driver has to be fully locked in for an hour of qualifying, all to get that coveted top spot. Then you get to race day. What's the most under pressure position on race day?
Pole position.
Pole position. Because who's coming right at you into
Number
turn
two,
one?
number
two,
three.
number three. They're dive bombing, and you have to hold that for the
Oh,
entire
yeah.
hour and a half in that race.
Which is what makes turn one so exciting. It's
Yeah.
the fact that these guys, in their mind, they're thinking, if I can just get a good enough jump, I can get to the end of this straight. And even if I slightly have a hint of a nose, even with his back tire, as long as I just brake later than him, I can send it into first place. That's all they're thinking. And when you have 20 guys on the grid thinking that one thing, it gets a little hectic.
And then whenever you finally do win a race, it is a massive celebration every weekend. You have thousands of people on the track, around the podium, the champagne celebration, the trophy presentation, the national anthems of the home race country and the race winner, the team down, like usually the podium's elevated, the team's down on the track going wild. As you're coming up the home straight, finishing the race in checker flag, the team is all up on the fence celebrating.
Oh, yeah.
It's a whole thing to win an F1 race, even though somebody wins 20 times a year. They make a huge deal out of it because you were the best out of the 20 best in the world that weekend.
Oh, yeah. If you're number one and you're going around that track, the second you pass that final turn and you're going towards the checkered flag, fireworks, just bang, bang on most tracks. There's just fireworks shooting everywhere. And here you come down the last straight. People are screaming and cheering. Your whole team is standing up on the wall, shaking their arms ferociously in the sky, thinking because you win. It's a powerful moment.
Right. And then you have like a money aspect in a lot of sports. Like looking back at baseball, MLB, the Yankees and the Red Sox have more money than anybody. That's why they are consistently good. Formula One kind of used to be like that, where you could recklessly spend, but money didn't necessarily translate to immediate or dominant success. You had to use that money to build a team, right? You look at the Mercedes dominant years, the Red Bull dominant years, the Ferrari dominant years. They used a lot of money wisely to compile a team. But you look back in the histories of F1, Williams, they've always been a small family-run team with money struggles, even in the early stages. Yet they're one of the top 3 constructors of all times in terms of wins. And so it's not that money can necessarily buy you the wins. You have to piece it all together to make a cohesive product on track. And I don't know. I just like how you can have the top teams every year, but then look back, Sergio Perez can win in a Force India car that was bottom of the midfield. You can have Pierre Gasly win in an AlphaTauri. I mean, it's not that anybody can win any weekend, but it's there. You can take that chance. Maybe once a year somebody jumps up and makes a crazy move.
But what decides all of that? What is all of the money going to? What is the number one tool that is used in this sport that defines everything?
Ooh. The car?
The car.
The car. Okay.
So that brings me into my next point. The cars. These things are wicked fast. Now, if you put all the cars ever made on a straight line and you have them drive straight, an F1 car will not win. That is because it is not built for that. It is built to be able to turn and go into these corners and accelerate faster than any other car in the world. And the reason why is because these aren't straight line races. These guys are slight left, followed by a 90-degree right, followed by a large banking sweeping left. And it's like you have to be able to take all of these different types of turns in the fastest way possible. And that's what these cars are engineered to do. And it is so cool.
It's the perfect balance of high performance, pure speed, and cornering.
Yeah. And the fact that millions of dollars.
What's the cost cap? 140 million?
The cost cap, about 138 million or something like that. And all of that is for one purpose and one purpose only. And that's to make this car go around that track the fastest.
What was the stat from last year with Mick Schumacher? Every time he broke his car, he tallied up $5 million in damages or something like that. That's why they parted ways with Mick Schumacher. They don't have money for that.
No, because these teams don't have, not all of them. Not all of them have $400, $500 million. And the thing about that is you can't even spend that money if you had it now because of this cost cap. So the fact that this cost cap is limiting everybody to a certain amount of money, that means that they're trying to focus all of this money to maximizing the potential of these parts. And the fact that they're able to not only use every cent of this money, but come up with these insane cars that are tenths, hundredths, thousands of a second away from each other in completely different patterns, completely different styles, designs, everything. That's the part that blows my mind.
I think the car was probably the second thing that pulled me into the sport. Obviously, Drive to Survive was the start. And that shows you more of the drama, the storylines that we've referenced. And that is definitely a hook, right? That's engaging. It gets you to keep coming back and watching more. But then, I mean, we're both big tech guys. You know, the engineering stuff, it's all very cool, how the cars are laid out and designed, the engine specs and everything like that. And so once you start looking at the cars and you're like, oh, they're not all the same.
No.
Oh, they have a 1.6 liter turbocharged hybrid engine that goes 1,000 to 1,200 horsepower in a car that weighs 5 pounds.
Oh, you mean to tell me none of these teams have any stats or blueprints to follow whatsoever, and somehow all manage to make a car that does the exact same thing?
Yep.
Wow.
Because they have computers. I wonder how they did it back in the day, like before computer simulations. I wonder if the cars were as similar as they are today.
I wonder if they just had testing, like
maybe.
more testing,
and they just looked at people's.
Yeah, well, because you can't do virtual testing because back then it didn't exist. I mean, not probably it didn't exist in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So I'm going to assume that maybe they just had more time to test these cars. Maybe the rules on how much track time you can have were less stringent, and that kind of allowed for them to see how these parts would do, so they could have like 3 different front ends and then test how all of them do and then go with the one that works best.
I think one of my favorite off-season activities, and this is very close to the season, but it's the car reveals, the livery reveals. But it's not necessarily for the design, because there's going to be a few teams that change it up a lot every year, and then a few teams like Red Bull where it's a memo. Hey, here's a car, the same as it's been for 12 years.
We're going to win.
We like it. But it's seeing the wing designs, right? So obviously Mercedes and the Mercedes kind of feeder teams 2 years ago and last year had that crazy sweeping front wing design that no other team had. Every other team's front wing was very flat and linear. Theirs was like a curvature shape. But then the side pods are very telling for car designs. Whenever they broke out the new cars last year, they have an event every year before the Bahrain GP or whatever the first race of the year is, where they line all 10 cars up on track and everybody can walk through and look at them. And this is the driver's first chance to see the cars as well. 9 of the cars all had similar side pod designs where they stuck out pretty far. Some of them swept in, some of them were flat, but they were large side pods. Mercedes, the only one that had a very tight to the car side pod design. And their car looked drastically different than everybody else. Also, the first year they stopped kind of doing real great.
Well, that one kind of bit them in the butt because, having a car that looks different, and with the design that they chose, if you're looking at that car, you would assume that is a fast car. It looks slick. It looks mean. But as we have come to learn, looks doesn't tell the full story.
No.
What does the actual track performance look like? And Mercedes did not look good.
No. Okay, I've got one more for you.
Okay.
This is, you referenced it a couple topics ago with the karting scene and these drivers knowing each other at a young age, but it's how you get to Formula One. It's not like in the U.S. where you have like Pee-wee sports and then junior high and high school and then college. It's not even like it's kind of like soccer, but like I guess the highest level of soccer where you have like an academy type setup. But to get to Formula One, you start as a toddler driving go-karts when you are 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Late entrants to the sport are like 10 years old.
Yeah,
which is crazy. I think we mentioned like maybe Pierre Gasly started racing at like 11 or 12 or something. It was a very late entry to karting.
I can't remember who it was, but yeah,
somebody was like preteen age when they started, and that's in itself crazy. But a lot of these guys are from Europe, and we've talked about kind of the closeness of Europe and how they all compete in these various karting championships. But the fact that it's karting, it's the same idea or principle, but at the same time, very different. Like, think about football in the States. Even in Pee-wee and junior high and high school, you're playing football, right? Yep. Same idea, same game, same concept. Now you scale that same thing to cars, but instead of sizing down the people, which the people also size, you're sizing down the car. And what is an F1 car if not a giant jacked up go-kart?
I mean, essentially, yeah.
Open wheel, open cockpit, lightweight.
You take off the halo, it's basically just a
To
go-kart.
If you look at some of the old like 90s and 2000s, even 80s F1 cars, just big go-karts. Like they didn't even
much.
try to hide that it was like a car. Just big go-kart.
They just took a go-kart frame, put a bigger engine in it.
But the fact that these kids start out competing with each other, there's the famous incidents between Charles and Max throughout their whole karting and Formula Series careers. There's you go back in the histories, you have Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel competing with each other on the karting scene. You go way back and you have Jos Verstappen competing with Michael Schumacher. Like it is awesome that they start these kids so young driving, like before they even have driver's license, and they're karting, and then they go to F4, which is you're starting to get in what looks like a Formula One car, but it is so dialed back in terms of power and downforce. But then you go to F3 and you're getting a better taste for it. And then F2, you're as close as you can get to Formula One. And then you get to F1. All along the way, you have to be the most dominant at that series to make it to the next step. Again, it's not like football. It's not like soccer or actual football, I guess, where you can be in an academy and you can be scouted and they can see developmental features in you like size or build or whatever it is like that. With F1, it's how fast did you go around that track?
Yeah, and now they have driver academies, so it means that they eye drivers. But at the end of the day, a driver academy doesn't mean anything unless you are going around that track.
And you're
faster.
still in those Formula Feeder series. You're not just at a training academy. No, you're racing in F3 that weekend.
Yeah. But what I mean is that like it doesn't matter if you're in the academy or not. That doesn't guarantee a future race seat in F1 for that team. It basically just means, hey, here's your chance to keep going.
You could be in the Ferrari Academy or the Red Bull Academy and never get anywhere. And eventually they'll just stop spending money on you.
Carlos Sainz went through the Red Bull Academy. Now he's a Ferrari driver. But he's also been a McLaren driver. He's also been
Renault.
Renault. He was a Renault driver.
Yeah, but I like how, again, it starts so young, and it's that exclusive club. They're all fighting for the same thing. They're all traveling all across Europe doing that. Like, we don't have that in America. We just don't. Everything is local, and it's small scale, and it's the same sport. Over there, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got?
I'm going to go into, let's see, we talked about the hundreds of millions of dollars around the sport. Let's go into the difficulty, or more specifically, the skill level that it gets to whenever he gets to this top level of competition.
Yeah.
Because we can have two drivers who essentially, if you watch them go around a track, essentially they're going to do the exact same thing. But they're not.
Yeah.
One person's going to go a little bit tighter. One person's going to go a little bit wider. One person's going to hit the exit perfectly. One person's going to brake later. And all of these itty bitty little nuances that you don't even really notice whenever you're watching, huge differences by the end of the race. Even by the end of one lap, you can have like half a second, a full second on somebody just from taking corners a little bit tighter or braking just a little bit later. It's crazy. The skill level involved when it gets to this level of competition is unmatched in my opinion, any other sport.
I'm pulling up the qualifying results from the last race, which was Saudi Arabia Jeddah, because I want some actual real life comparisons for this. Jeremiah mentioned that it's one corner exit, right? And he's not saying, so let's say that a track has, I'll use Jeddah as an example, I think it has 27 turns, which is the most of any track. He's not saying in 20 turns that you're making a mistake. No. One turn, you make a mistake that one other driver didn't make, you're now 15th instead of first.
Yeah, and perspective on that, every turn has different aspects to it. There's the entrance, there's how you take the actual turn in terms of balancing the throttle with the brake, and then there's the exit. We're not talking about, oh, you messed up a turn, all those aspects were messed up. No, you missed one aspect on one turn.
You missed a shift. You didn't hit the throttle fast enough. You didn't brake fast enough.
You broke too late. Brake?
Brake, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, you did that too late. Anyway, one of these aspects is going to cost you 2/10. And just like that, now you're playing catch up for the rest of the race.
And for context, again, these are the 20 best drivers for Formula in the world. But that difference between first place and 20th place in a qualifying or a race, I'll use qualifying because a race it's more spread out. But in a qualifying setting is a second and a half at most, maybe a second.
Yeah, easily.
And I'll use this example here in a second, but maybe a second. But the other difference is you're either Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton. You're winning every single race and you're making $30 to $50 million a year, or you're I'll use Nicholas Latifi. I know he's not a driver this year, but I'll use him. And you're never winning, and you're making $600,000 a year. Yeah, it's a lot of money. It ain't $40 million a year.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you about that whole second and a half distance between the drivers and the qualifying. If you want to make that number even closer, take the worst driver on the grid and put him with the best driver on the grid in the same car.
Yeah, and then the gap will get shortened.
And now we're talking about the best and the worst. And I guarantee you the distance between them is probably only going to be like 0.6,
Yeah,
7
quarter
tenths.
of a second at most. So here's the Jeddah, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix qualifying. I'll just give a couple of calls here. Sergio Perez takes pole position. He goes 1 minute 28 seconds 0.2. So 1:28.2.
Okay.
Charles Leclerc comes in second. There's a big difference in second and first in Formula One racing. 1 minute 28.225.
Gee, so 25 thousandths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hundreds or thousands, whatever it is. It's not a lot of time. And that, so in a minute and a half, Charles Leclerc had a fraction of a percent worse than Sergio Perez, but now he is significantly disadvantaged in the race.
So if he had just taken 2 turns a little bit differently, that probably would have been different.
Yeah. You look down a little bit, Esteban Ocon in fifth, 129.068. George Russell, 129.104.
God, that's so
We're talking
close.
thousands of seconds.
That's so close.
And then you also have the other issues where you have guys getting kicked out for like 0.04 of a second. I'm trying to find the exact example, but somebody in Jeddah, or maybe it was Bahrain, it was 0.04 of a second was the difference between Q1 and Q2.
Right.
Maybe it was Hulkenberg. It was one of them, but that is rough whenever you get to that level. And then you talk about the difficulty too. We mentioned this, I think, in the last episode. These guys are so well trained. They can run these tracks blindfolded because they've had to memorize it, because you can't just rely on seeing things in real time. It's too fast. It all has to be muscle memory, which means they need muscle memory this year for 23 tracks.
Yeah, essentially, whenever it gets to this level, it's not a matter of, oh, the track goes to the right, I'm turning right. No, it's, that right turn is coming 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 turns before it even does. So what you're actually looking for is, you're not looking for where the track goes. You're looking for what applies to this situation. Like, oh, I'm a little bit more onto the right side on the track than I normally am. Let me move to the left, or let me change my entrance speed, or, oh, there's a car in front of me. Let me go to the left and try and take the outside around this corner. Like, you're talking about making decisions about something that's happening right here, right now. We're not talking about the track is, they already know the track.
Right.
They know what they're going to do around the track. Like you said, they can all do this blindfolded. They're looking at what's going on right now in this race, qualifying, practice session.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've encouraged people before, but if you have a local karting scene, or you can drive to where there's like some good karting action, give it a go. Don't go by yourself, or if you have to go by yourself, that's fine, but ask what like the track like records are, because what that's going to do is, let's say that you run a 60-second lap on whatever the karting track is, and you're like, oh man, I'm fast, this was good, and then they tell you the lap record's 42 seconds. You're like, where do I get 18 seconds?
And that's so real too, because I remember whenever at the Lone Star Kart Park that we went to, I got on the top 100 list for times, and I was like, okay, so I'm in the top 100. Let's see how far I can stretch this. I went and looked at number 1, and he was like 5 seconds quicker than me. I was like, I can take off like a tenth.
A tenth?
Where am I going to get 5
seconds? If you don't have a karting scene near you, get a PC or an Xbox or PlayStation and play the F1 video game, and you'll at least get a feeling for how different these cars operate rather than like a regular car, and then also the tenths of a second that we're talking about, because you'll run a lap, again, that you think is really good, and then you qualify 17th.
Yeah, and there's nothing more frustrating than running what you assume to be your best lap and then having to try and find a couple more tenths.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other favorites you'd like to discuss?
I do want to talk about the international aspect.
Yeah,
so we talked about how not every single, but majority of countries, they all have a race. So that alone tells you this thing is worldwide. I mean, you have fans, Italy, you have fans in France, you have fans in Belgium, you have fans in the United States, Mexico,
Insert all
Brazil.
European countries.
It's ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about like football. Football is a mainly American sport. Now we do have a game, I think, that's now played in London once a year.
London, I think a Germany
or something
game.
like that. Yeah, but that's not a Formula One race. No.
They're going to bring out 60,000 fans for one day. Formula One's going to bring out 400,000 fans.
Yeah, and that's almost every single track. We're not talking about, some tracks in some countries. No, every single track in every single country has this many dedicated fans that are watching.
Hungary's got 400,000 people.
Yeah, granted, a lot of them have a specific favorite based on what country they're in. Yeah. But, I mean, Italy's probably the majority of them are cheering for
the
Ferrari.
Scuderia.
Yeah, you're going to have that, but that's okay.
They're not all AlphaTauri fans?
No. No, but that's kind of my point, is that it's a worldwide sport, and it's got acclaim, if you will, everywhere. Everywhere in the world, every single one of these countries. It's like a Super Bowl for them.
And you get the different driver dynamics, which I'm going to touch on Oscar Piastri in a second, but the ones that we know about, you have Max Verstappen, who came in very monotone, dull, serious, right? Now he's loosening up a little bit as he starts to win. He seems to be having more fun with it, but early on he was all business all the time. I don't want to talk about any of your crap. He didn't participate in Drive to Survive, none of it. And then you have the more bubbly personalities like your Daniel Ricciardos of past seasons.
Your Yuki Tsunoda.
Where they ask everybody what their dream is, and they all say to be world champion. And he says, I don't know, start a restaurant or something.
It's like, Yuki, you missed the whole point.
Yuki, you could start a restaurant like tomorrow. You have the money. You can do it. And then you have the guys that are some unknowns like Esteban Ocon. I don't know too much about him. We see Pierre Gasly a little bit in Drive to Survive. He's also an unknown. And then you have the villains of the sport like Fernando Alonso that just have this. I don't really know why he's a villain other than just controversial or has hot takes.
And that also is kind of like the Max Verstappen thing, where I feel like he's now kind of moved out of that villain role. The reason why he was given that villain role is because he was being labeled essentially a cancer on every team that he went to. And that's for no other reason than the fact that none of these teams could produce a car that he could take to the top.
Right.
I mean, because that's what Fernando does, is he outperforms whatever car he's in. And so when he gets on one of these teams and the car is terrible, he's going to get what he wants out of it, or get what he can out of it. And then he's going to be like, all right, y'all just don't have anything for me. I don't know what you want from me.
Next?
I can't perform miracles. This is ridiculous.
But that also ties back to the international aspect of, you have guys from everywhere that they don't have to get along, but they're all seeing each other every weekend. We talked about the exclusive club of 20 drivers, and it is interesting seeing them clash.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what country you come from, what nationality you have, or what language you speak. Somehow, they all figure out a way to communicate with each other.
And it's really funny hearing like Christian Horner's like British accent fighting with Toto Wolff's. Is he Austrian?
It's a very, very heavy accent.
They're just fighting each other verbally across the room. Yeah, no, I love that part of it. And that ties back to the whole Europe thing too, of it's kind of small and close knit, but at the same time super diverse in terms of what you're getting.
Oh yeah,
in the behind the scenes. Okay, I think that wraps up our some of our favorite things about Formula One. I'm going to ask for some feedback here. If y'all have your favorite thing, so maybe you've watched last season, you've watched Drive to Survive, or you watched the first 2 races of 2023, and you've developed what has got you hooked onto Formula One, let us know. Like I said at the start of the episode, if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We would love to see that, love to hear it. We'd love to incorporate some of those into future episodes. If you're listening to our podcast, find us on Facebook. We're at Turn One on Facebook, and just leave us a comment on any of our posts. And again, we'd love to include some listener feedback in future episodes.
Yeah, we 100% are looking for that, because at the end of the day, we talk a lot about Drive to Survive. We talk a lot about karting. Those are the things that we know. The F1 video game. These are things that we know. These are things that helped us to learn essentially what it is that we're watching. Now we've done more research past that into YouTube and Reddit and other kind of forums and stuff that we can go and find articles on or whatever. But essentially, we don't catch everything.
No.
So if you've watched a YouTube video about something that we haven't covered yet, and you think it'd be something really cool that you'd like to hear us touch on, let us know in the comments down below. We'll talk about it. We'll probably end up in an episode.
And there's certainly things that we've seen or want to experience, but either it's a time commitment or a money commitment. Like if you've done like a Formula One experience where you've driven it's not the F1 car.
It's a
like
two-seater.
It's like a mock version of it. If you've done that, Let us know how that was.
Oh, yeah.
Was it worth the money? We don't know. If you've ever been to like an awesome exclusive karting place, we've only been to the local, I'll say like the municipality, muni golf course type karting places. Like they're nice, but it's not the dominant exclusive clubs, right? We're not in those. If you're in a racing league or racing club, let us know. How's that going? How does it stack up to Formula One? Are these guys into Formula One?
If you've been to one of these races and you've had the full weekend package experience, you went to the practice sessions, you went to the qualifying, you stayed for the races, you watched the festivities that happen after the race or during the whole weekend itself, let us know what that's like. We want to live through you.
Yeah, absolutely. But that wraps up episode 9, some of our favorites about Formula One. We appreciate you watching and listening. Your feedback appreciated as always. But with that, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.